Anxiety doesn't ask for permission. It arrives suddenly, without warning, and without considering the place or the moment. You could be lying down trying to rest, in the middle of an important meeting, surrounded by people, or completely alone, and yet it finds a way to settle in. It's as if a shadow casts itself over your mind, quickening your heart, stealing your breath, and bringing a sense that something bad is about to happen, even when nothing around you justifies such fear. And in the attempt to control this inner turmoil, the opposite happens. The more you try to hold on, the more anxiety slips through the cracks and takes over every thought. This is the point where many wonder, will I spend the rest of my life stuck in this cycle? Trying to control what I can't? Trying to hide what I can't disguise? The truth is that much of the struggle against anxiety stems from the mistaken idea that it can be overcome solely through human effort. There's a belief that just thinking positively, taking deep breaths, or distracting the mind with something else will make the anguish disappear. But experience shows that these attempts work only for a moment, and soon the mind is invaded again by the same suffocating weight. This is where we need to look beyond what's visible. What happens within us cannot be resolved solely with external tools. It's not just about brain chemistry, stressful circumstances, or lack of rest. These factors exist, but the root of anxiety goes deeper. It touches the essence of what we choose to believe, the place where we place our trust, and the foundation that sustains our life when the ground seems to crumble. Anxiety reveals not only a tired mind, but a heart desperately seeking security and finding no answer in what's within human reach. And it's precisely at this point that the Bible invites us to a different path. It doesn't deny the reality of anxiety, pretend it doesn't exist, or reduce it to a mere insignificant detail. On the contrary, the Word of God acknowledges the anguish, the pain, and the weight it causes. But at the same time, it opens a door to escape that doesn't rely on magical formulas, but on spiritual principles that have transformed lives for centuries and continue to offer rest to those who dare to put them into practice. Think of men like David, who described sleepless nights surrounded by visible and invisible enemies, but found refuge in declaring, "In peace I will lie down and sleep, for you alone, Lord, make me dwell in safety." Think of Elijah, the prophet who faced kings and crowds, but, overcome by fear and despair, asked for death until he was visited by the gentle voice of God that restored his strength. Think of Paul, who wrote about the peace that surpasses all understanding while imprisoned and facing death threats. These examples are not in the Bible by chance. They remind us that anxiety is not an isolated experience of the modern world, but a human reality that has always existed. More than that, they show us that victory over it doesn't depend on circumstances changing, but on where we choose to anchor our trust. The method presented in the Word of God is not a set of fleeting techniques, but a spiritual principle that, when understood and applied, can bring relief in minutes and peace that endures, even when nothing on the outside has changed. Perhaps you're listening to this now and wondering, is it really possible? Can I truly, in a few minutes, feel the weight of anxiety replaced by peace? The answer is yes. Not because there's a magical formula, but because there's a living, present God who cares about every detail of your life. He didn't promise that we'd never face difficulties, but He promised to be with us through every one of them. And it's exactly that presence that changes everything. What you need to understand is that anxiety isn't overcome through solitary struggle. It's overcome through surrender. It's not about gripping the reins of life tightly until everything is under control, but about letting go of the control we never had to trust in the one who is above all things. This is the key that distinguishes those who live crushed by fear from those who find rest in the midst of the storm. And here's the invitation. You can keep trying alone, running in circles, expending energy without getting anywhere. Or you can try a different, deeper, and more effective path. The path that men and women of faith walked before us and that remains accessible today. A path that requires nothing more than your decision to trust. Anxiety doesn't have to define your life. It can be overcome, and the method for doing so is before you now. But before revealing how to apply this principle, we need to understand the root of anxiety and why it insists on holding us captive. When you see where it originates, you'll have the clarity to cut it off at its source and apply the truth that sets you free. That's exactly what we'll talk about next. The root of anxiety isn't just in the symptoms we feel in our bodies or the thoughts that torment us. The root is deeper in how we interpret life, the lens through which we view situations, and, above all, where we place our trust. When someone experiences constant anxiety, they often think the cause is a packed schedule, excessive responsibilities, or an unexpected crisis. It's true that these factors intensify distress, but they aren't its origin. The real problem is believing that everything depends on our effort, that our security lies solely in our hands, and that if we lose control, we'll lose the meaning of life. This way of thinking creates an unbearable burden. Those who believe everything depends on them carry a weight far heavier than they can bear. It's like trying to cross an ocean with stones in your backpack. With each step, the load grows heavier until the body and mind can't take it anymore. Anxiety is born exactly there, in the illusion that we're responsible for controlling the uncontrollable. Cartesian philosophy taught that the human mind should seek clarity and order to understand reality. When this principle is distorted, it creates the expectation that if we think hard enough, we'll find a solution to any problem. But anxiety proves the opposite. The more we think, the more we confuse the mind. The more we analyze, the more trapped we become in negative possibilities. It's a maze with no exit because the mind on its own can't produce the peace we so desperately desire. This is why the Bible offers a different path. It teaches that true trust doesn't lie in our ability to solve everything, but in God, who knows the end from the beginning. Anxiety, in this sense, is a sign that the heart is trying to take on a role that doesn't belong to it. When we try to control what's beyond our reach, we experience fear. When we surrender control to the Creator, we experience rest. Notice what Paul writes in Philippians: "Do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. And the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus." This isn't just an instruction, but a spiritual diagnosis. Paul states that anxiety shouldn't dominate any area of our lives because there's a real alternative: to present everything to God in prayer. The root of anxiety, therefore, lies in forgetting this truth and living as if everything depends on us. The modern mind, shaped by haste, performance, and constant comparison, reinforces this error. You need to be productive, prove your worth, achieve greater results. And the more you strive to be enough, the more anxiety grows, because the soul knows this standard is impossible to sustain. The biblical invitation is entirely opposed to this rhythm. It doesn't ask you to ignore responsibilities, but to place them in the right perspective. Life demands effort, but it doesn't demand that you carry the weight of the world alone. The true root of anxiety is a heart that doesn't fully trust God, but tries to compensate for that lack of trust with excessive control. This understanding is liberating because it places the fight against anxiety in a spiritual perspective. It's not just about breathing exercises, meditation techniques, or temporary relief medications. These tools can help, but they don't address the cause. What truly transforms is learning to let go of what was never under our control and accepting that our life is secure in the hands of one greater than us. When we grasp this, the mind finds clarity. Cartesian philosophy said, "I think, therefore I am." But the gospel reveals something greater. I trust, therefore I rest. This is the key to cutting the root of anxiety. As long as we insist that our existence depends on keeping everything under control, we'll be consumed by fear. When we recognize that our life is held by God, we discover we can live fully, even in the midst of storms. Perhaps this is the deepest change you need to make today. To recognize that it's not your schedule, performance, or strength that will determine your peace, but the decision to trust. Anxiety ceases to be the tyrant controlling your life when you understand you don't need to be the master of your own destiny. There's a God who has already written your story, and when you surrender the future to His hands, the present becomes light. And now that you understand where anxiety comes from and its true root, you're ready to learn the practical method that can bring immediate relief and lasting peace in minutes. In the next chapter, you'll discover how to apply this principle in a simple, clear, and transformative way, so your mind and heart can experience the rest God has reserved for you. The biblical method to overcome anxiety in minutes is neither complicated nor requires long rituals or impossible practices to apply in daily life. It was designed to be lived anywhere, anytime, and in any circumstance. Whether you're in a quiet room, on a crowded bus, or facing a decision that feels bigger than you, this spiritual principle can be activated in moments because it doesn't depend on the external environment, but on the disposition of your heart. It all begins with recognition. You can't overcome anxiety if you insist on pretending it doesn't exist. Many try to hide, suppress, or mask the anguish, believing that ignoring it will make it disappear. But denying what you feel only increases the weight. The first step is to look inward and admit, yes, I'm anxious, I'm afraid, I'm trying to carry something alone that I can't. This act of recognition isn't a sign of weakness, it's a sign of clarity. Those who recognize have already taken the first step toward freedom. The second movement is conscious surrender. The Bible uses a powerful expression. Cast all your anxiety on Him because He cares for you. Casting isn't politely handing something over, like passing an object from one hand to another. Casting is throwing with force, without hesitation, without holding back. It's looking at the weight you carry and deciding radically to place it in God's hands. This gesture, which can be done in a simple and sincere prayer, has the power to transfer the burden. In minutes, what was crushing your mind begins to be replaced by a real sense of lightness because you've stopped carrying it alone. The third step is declaring the word. Fear feeds on distorted thoughts, catastrophic scenarios that the mind insists on creating. The only way to silence these voices is to replace the lie with the truth. When you declare, out loud, a verse that affirms God's faithfulness, you're bringing to mind a reality greater than any worry. Philippians 4:6-7, for example, isn't just a text to be read, but to be proclaimed. By repeating, "The peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard my heart and my mind in Christ Jesus," you're programming your mind with the truth that overcomes deception. The fourth and final movement is intentional rest. After recognizing, surrendering, and declaring, it's time to stop. Silence the rush. Breathe deeply and choose to trust. This may take just a few minutes, but it's enough to experience a real change. At this moment, anxiety loses its strength because you've decided not to fight alone. This rest isn't just physical but spiritual. It's the awareness that God is present, that He heard your prayer, and that He is faithful to fulfill what He promised. What makes this method so powerful is its simplicity. It's not a complicated technique, doesn't require deep theological knowledge, and doesn't depend on lengthy processes. It can be practiced by anyone, anywhere. Recognize, surrender, declare, and rest. This is the movement that transforms anxiety into peace in minutes. But you might still wonder, does this really work in extreme situations? Can this method be applied when everything seems to be falling apart? The answer is yes, because it doesn't depend on circumstances. It depends on the decision to trust God. Paul wrote about the peace that surpasses understanding while imprisoned. David declared trust while fleeing for his life. Elijah found renewed strength in the midst of depression and fear of death. What they have in common is that they didn't try to overcome alone, but chose to apply the principle of surrender. This method isn't just momentary relief, but a spiritual practice that can be repeated every day. It doesn't eliminate problems, but changes how you face them. It doesn't calm the storm, but gives the certainty that there's a God capable of calming your heart, even when the wind keeps blowing. And it's this certainty that makes the difference between living dominated by anxiety and living in victory over it. Now that you know the method, the next step is to put it into practice. It's not enough to hear or understand intellectually. You need to apply it. In the next chapter, we'll do a simple, direct, and profoundly transformative exercise together. You'll be guided to apply these 4 steps in real time, so you not only understand the principle, but feel in your own heart the peace God promised. Now is the moment to put into practice what you've only heard so far. Knowing there's a method is helpful, but it doesn't transform on its own. What brings real change is applying it. So allow yourself to pause for a few minutes and experience this exercise with me. Wherever you are, choose now to slow down. Close your eyes if possible and focus only on my voice and what we're about to do together. The first movement is to recognize. Ask yourself, what exactly is making me anxious right now? It could be a debt, a decision, a difficult relationship, an uncertain future. Name what you feel without fear or censorship. Say to yourself clearly, I'm anxious because of this. By naming what weighs you down, you begin to weaken the power of anxiety because it no longer operates in the silent shadows of the mind, but is exposed to the light of awareness. Now, the second movement is to surrender. Imagine you're holding this weight in your hands. It could be a problem, a worry, or a fear that keeps returning. Visualize yourself holding this burden. Now, with the same intensity you're holding it, decide to let go. Say in prayer, simply, Lord, I can't carry this alone. I surrender it into your hands. Remember, surrendering isn't just speaking. It's deciding within yourself that you won't hold onto this burden anymore. Casting is transferring it completely. Allow yourself to feel the lightness of this. Surrender. The third movement is to declare. Use the words the Bible itself provides. Say out loud, the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, guards my heart and my mind in Christ Jesus. Repeat this declaration until it becomes stronger than any fearful thought. Each time your mind tries to create a scenario of panic, respond with this truth. By declaring, you're programming your heart to believe and your mind to rest. Finally, the fourth movement is to rest. Do nothing but breathe deeply, silently, and realize that God's presence is there with you. Feel the air going in and out, and acknowledge that, as you breathe, there's a God sustaining every detail of your life. Don't rush to ask. Don't rush to think. Just rest in the certainty that He has received what you surrendered. This is the moment when peace begins to occupy the space once dominated by anxiety. This exercise can be done in minutes, but its effects can last hours, days, or even weeks. The more you practice, the faster your heart learns to surrender, and the more naturally your mind learns to rest. Anxiety no longer needs to be a prison. It can become a signal that it's time to apply this method, to pause, recognize, surrender, declare, and rest. Perhaps you felt something different just now. A calm you didn't have before. A relief in your chest. A clarity of thought that seemed distant. This is the presence of God manifesting in the midst of your prayer. Don't ignore this experience. It's not a trick of the mind. It's a real response to faith. Jesus Himself promised, "Peace I leave with you, my peace I give you. I do not give to you as the world gives." This peace doesn't depend on circumstances. It's the peace that comes from Him and remains even when nothing changes on the outside. What you just experienced can become part of your routine. Whenever you feel anxiety trying to take over, return to this process. Recognize, surrender, declare, rest. In minutes, you can completely change the internal environment of your mind and heart. It's a practice as simple as it is powerful, and here's something even deeper. When you live this experience repeatedly, you begin to notice that anxiety loses ground not only in isolated moments, but throughout your life. You become someone less susceptible to external pressures, someone more confident, someone who has learned to depend on God in every detail. This is the true purpose of the method, not just to relieve, but to transform how you face challenges. Now that you've experienced it and seen it's real, you're ready for the next step. In the next chapter, we'll explore how this practice can become a constant lifestyle, sustaining your mind and heart, not just in moments of crisis, but every day, guiding you toward a destiny of peace and full trust in God. Living in victory. Over anxiety doesn't mean experiencing fleeting relief only in moments of crisis. It means learning to transform this practice into a lifestyle, a continuous way of existing where every day is sustained by trust in God. The secret isn't in seeking peace only when everything is falling apart, but in building a heart that remains steadfast even when the storm arrives. Anxiety feeds on disordered routines and a constantly restless mind. When you decide to apply the biblical method not as an emergency resource but as a daily habit, your mind is re-educated to rest. This doesn't mean you'll never feel the weight of worry again, but it means it will no longer have power over you. Instead of being dominated by anxiety, you become someone who masters their reactions through trust. Think of how an athlete trains. They don't win because they practice only on competition days, but because they create a consistent routine. So it is with the Spirit. The practice of recognizing, surrendering, declaring, and resting, when done every day, shapes a new mental and spiritual pattern. Gradually, you notice that worries no longer find the same space as before. They may try to creep in, but they encounter a heart guarded by the peace of God. This process creates something even deeper: clarity. Cartesian philosophy taught us to seek order in thought to reach truth. The Bible shows that clarity comes from trust. When the heart is at peace, the mind can see more clearly. Decisions once made in desperation are now guided by wisdom. Problems once seen as giants reveal themselves as smaller in the perspective of faith. Resting in God creates space for a lighter, more focused life on what truly matters. Another essential point is understanding that victory over anxiety isn't limited to the individual. When you experience this transformation, you become a source of inspiration for others. People around you begin to notice the difference. Where there was once restlessness, there's now calm. Where there was fear, there's now confidence. Your life becomes a silent testimony that it's possible to live differently, impacting not only you, but everyone around you. The daily practice of this lifestyle also strengthens your spiritual identity. Anxiety steals clarity about who we are and where we're going. But when you learn to live in trust, you begin to see your destiny differently, not as a sequence of dangers to avoid, but as a path prepared by God. This understanding generates courage to face challenges and perseverance to remain steadfast. And here's a transformative detail. Living this way, anxiety ceases to be an enemy and becomes a warning sign. Whenever you feel restlessness rising, you'll understand it's time to pause, apply the method, and return to rest. Anxiety becomes a reminder to realign your trust. Instead of imprisoning you, it becomes an opportunity to strengthen your faith. This lifestyle isn't a utopia, it's practice. It doesn't depend on ideal circumstances, but on a daily renewed decision. There will be days when it's easier and others when it requires more effort. There will be moments of quick victory and moments when you need to persist. But consistency is what brings transformation. The more you practice, the more natural God's peace becomes in your life. And when you look back after weeks or months of living this way, you realize something has changed profoundly. The crises that once paralyzed you no longer have the same power. The fears that once stole your sleep no longer dictate your choices. What happened was simple and powerful. You learned to live in trust, and that trust became the foundation of your existence. Now that you understand how to make this method a lifestyle, it's time to go further. In the next chapter, we'll explore the greater destiny this practice reveals. Because overcoming anxiety isn't just about living in peace in the present, but about walking in the eternal purpose God has already established for you. When we understand the practice and routine of victory over anxiety, we realize the next step is to connect this transformation to our destiny. Anxiety doesn't exist just to overwhelm us. It serves as an alert about how we've been living, where we've placed our trust, and the urgency of seeking something greater than ourselves. Every moment of restlessness reveals the need to align our lives with the purpose God planned, to walk toward the destiny He established before we were even born. This destiny isn't something distant or abstract. It's concrete, spiritual, and real. Living in God's destiny means living by principles that sustain the mind, strengthen the heart, and guide every decision. When we apply the biblical method against anxiety, we begin to see every challenge through the lens of this destiny. What once seemed like unbearable pressure becomes an opportunity to demonstrate faith, practice trust, and experience peace that transcends human understanding. This change in perspective transforms not only how we react to crises but our entire perception of life. Decisions once made in fear are now made with clarity. Choices that once caused apprehension are now guided by the certainty that God is in control. Anxiety ceases to be an obstacle and becomes a compass, showing where we need to surrender more, trust more, and stand firm. The principle is simple but profound. Recognizing the weight we feel, surrendering it to God, declaring His truth over us, and resting in His presence isn't just an exercise for immediate relief, but the construction of a character capable of living in constant peace. Each application strengthens our spiritual identity, showing we don't depend on our strength, but on the Creator's faithfulness. The more we practice, the more natural it becomes to live in God's presence, even in situations that once caused fear and insecurity. And it's exactly here that we perceive the depth of transformation. Anxiety, when confronted with practical faith, reveals something beyond ourselves. It teaches us about dependence, surrender, and the need to align our hearts with the divine plan. By facing it with the biblical method, we learn that true freedom isn't the absence of problems, but God's presence in the midst of them. It's the awareness that we don't walk alone, don't fight alone, and that every challenge can be transformed into spiritual growth. This understanding leads to a posture of courage and trust. When we understand our destiny in God, anxiety loses its power because we're no longer guided by fear of the unknown, but by the certainty that every step is supported by His hand. Every worry becomes an opportunity to strengthen our faith, and every difficulty becomes a space to experience peace that surpasses understanding. Living this way is a daily calling. It's not about an isolated moment of prayer or a quick exercise in times of crisis. It's about a constant decision to trust, apply the method, and live by principles that shape a tranquil mind, a steadfast heart, and a life aligned with God's destiny. This continuous practice creates an inner security that nothing and no one can shake. And here's the essential point. The destiny God has traced for you is greater than any worry, fear, or situation that seems overwhelming. Anxiety is just a temporary curtain that, when removed by the consistent application of the biblical method, reveals the path that was always before you. This path is marked by peace, clarity, trust, and the fulfillment of God's purpose. Now that you've understood the root of anxiety, learned the practical method to overcome it, experienced the real exercise of surrender and rest, and understood how to make it a lifestyle, the next step is to look forward and realize that every moment lived in this practice brings you closer to the destiny God prepared. In the next chapter, we'll dive deeper into how this connection with destiny transforms not only your mind and heart, but your entire life, creating a freedom that goes far beyond the absence of anxiety. Arriving at the point of living in the destiny God prepared for you completely transforms how you face each day. Anxiety ceases to be a dominant force and becomes a reminder of the power of faith and surrender. Living connected to the divine destiny means realizing that every situation, difficulty, and challenge has a greater purpose, even when we can't see it immediately. This perception changes how you react because you stop fighting against the invisible and start walking aligned with what is eternal. When you understand you don't need to carry the weight of life alone, every obstacle becomes less threatening. Anxiety, which once seemed unbearable, is now a warning sign, indicating it's time to apply the biblical method. Recognize, surrender, declare, and rest. This cycle creates a pattern of inner freedom that strengthens each time it's practiced. With this, not only does the mind find immediate relief, but the heart begins to fill with deep trust, a certainty nothing can shake. Cartesian philosophy teaches us to seek clarity, but when combined with spiritual wisdom, this clarity becomes real peace. The human mind is often dominated by repetitive thoughts and imaginary scenarios that increase fear and insecurity. By surrendering anxiety to God, you interrupt this cycle and create space to perceive spiritual truth. You're not alone, and the future is in His hands. This understanding changes your perception of the present. The effect of this practice goes beyond the moment of relief. Over time, you begin to see life's events from another perspective. Problems that once caused paralysis are now faced with wisdom. Important decisions are made with calm and discernment. Fears that once dominated your choices lose strength because your mind has been reprogrammed to trust in what's greater than you. This transformation creates a life marked by peace, courage, and constant clarity, even in the face of uncertainties. Another essential aspect of this transformation is the spiritual security it provides. When you live in the flow of trust, you begin to realize you don't depend on immediate results or total control over everything around you. Anxiety doesn't vanish magically, but you learn not to react to it with panic or despair. Each time you apply the method, your faith is reinforced, your spiritual identity is strengthened, and your divine destiny becomes clearer. Living connected to the destiny God prepared also changes your relationships with those around you. The peace you find becomes contagious. Friends, family, and colleagues begin to notice a difference. Serenity in the face of chaos, clarity in decisions, unshakable trust. You become a silent example of practical faith, someone who doesn't just talk about trust in God, but demonstrates it tangibly in every action and reaction. This constant practice creates emotional and spiritual resilience. Anxiety ceases to be a prison and becomes an indicator of the need for surrender and trust. By recognizing the signs, applying the method, and resting in God's presence, you continuously strengthen yourself, creating a cycle of inner growth that transforms every challenge into an opportunity for faith and every crisis into a moment of spiritual strengthening. And finally, when this connection with destiny is consolidated, you discover that peace isn't just the absence of anxiety, but a constant presence. Life doesn't become perfect, but it becomes manageable, clear, and full of purpose. You realize that every step, even in difficult moments, is guided by God, and that nothing you face can steal the trust now residing in your heart. When anxiety is trying to control your mind, and the easier it becomes to interrupt this cycle. Now that you understand how living connected to the divine destiny transforms your mind, heart, and entire life, in the next chapter, we'll show how to sustain this practice daily and how it generates a freedom that surpasses any human limit, becoming an experience of permanent victory over anxiety. Sustaining the daily practice that overcomes anxiety is the definitive step to transforming victory into a lifestyle. The difference between temporary relief and continuous peace lies in consistency. It's not about a mechanical ritual, but a daily decision to place your mind and heart in God's hands. applying the biblical method of recognizing, surrendering, declaring, and resting in any circumstance. Consistency creates habits that reprogram the mind and strengthen the spirit, making faith practical and tangible. The routine of daily surrender works like spiritual training. Just as a body needs exercise to become strong and resilient, the spirit needs practice to stabilize in the face of life's pressures. Each time you recognize the weight of anxiety, surrender it to God, declare the truth of the Word, and rest in His presence, you're creating a reaction pattern that doesn't depend on external circumstances. The same principle that brings peace in minutes begins to generate tranquility in hours and later in days. This daily practice also strengthens the perception of your spiritual identity. Anxiety tries to define us as fragile and incapable of handling life. But constant faith teaches that we're sustained by the Creator. By applying the method every day, you internalize the truth that you don't need to be the master of everything to live in peace. Trust in God ceases to be theoretical and becomes a concrete experience, shaping how you perceive challenges, handle decisions, and face unexpected situations. Another essential point is the continuous impact of this practice on your thought and mind. Anxiety thrives on the lack of control and the belief that we must do everything alone. When you apply the biblical method daily, your mind begins to get used to peace, rest, and surrender. Catastrophic thoughts lose strength, recurring worries start to dissipate, and clarity takes the place of fear. The mind becomes an ally instead of a constant battlefield. The effect of daily practice also manifests in the body. Anxiety causes tension, a racing heart, restlessness, and even sleep problems. When you learn to apply the method regularly, these physical reactions lose intensity because the heart rests and the body calms. God's peace manifests not only emotionally, but in your entire being. Each daily exercise of surrender creates a chain reaction that strengthens the balance between body, mind, and spirit. Sustaining this practice daily requires discipline, but not an exhausting human effort. It's a discipline born from the choice to trust and the conscious repetition of a proven spiritual principle. The more you practice, the more natural it becomes to respond to anxiety with surrender and rest, and the less space worry finds to grow. The daily habit transforms the method into an automatic reflex of your faith, creating a life marked by tranquility, security, and constant trust. And there's something even deeper. Living daily in this cycle strengthens your purpose. Each time you surrender anxiety and rest in God, you reinforce the awareness that your life is aligned with a divine destiny. This practice creates not only inner freedom, but directs your steps toward the plan God has traced for you. Anxiety ceases to be an obstacle and becomes a bridge to spiritual maturity and the fulfillment of your destiny. When you understand this, you realize that the daily practice is, in fact, an invitation to live in fullness. Each moment of surrender strengthens your faith, clarifies your mind, and stabilizes your heart. The peace that seemed hard to achieve becomes constant, and anxiety stops dominating your life. You don't just survive life's pressures. You begin to walk with security, trust, and purpose. Now that you've learned to sustain this practice daily, in the next chapter, we'll show how to integrate this principle permanently into every area of your life, creating an experience of total freedom where anxiety no longer has power over you, and God's peace becomes constant. Integrating the biblical method permanently into every area of your life is the step that consolidates victory over anxiety and transforms peace into a constant experience. It's not about a one-time effort or an isolated moment of prayer. It's about living daily with a surrendered heart and a mind guided by God's truth, so that every situation, challenge, and decision is led by this spiritual practice. This integration creates real freedom because you don't depend on external circumstances to find peace. The first point of this integration is realizing that anxiety can arise in any aspect of life: work, relationships, finances, health, or unfulfilled dreams. Each of these areas can be touched by fear and worry. The method you've learned, recognize, surrender, declare, and rest, needs to be applied to each of them. By doing this consistently, you begin to respond to anxiety uniformly and naturally, without being caught off guard by sudden crises. When the practice becomes routine, you develop spiritual discernment. You start to notice patterns in moments of restlessness and understand which thoughts or situations are creating unnecessary anxiety. This discernment isn't intellectual, but spiritual. It comes from the practical experience of surrendering every weight to God and resting in His presence. The more you apply the method, the faster you recognize before it grows. Another profound effect of this integration is emotional consistency. People dominated by anxiety often oscillate between moments of calm and crises of fear. By applying the method in every area of life, you create an internal axis of stability. Your mind gets used to resting, your heart gets used to trusting, and your emotions begin to reflect the peace God offers. This consistency not only strengthens faith, but also improves relationships, productivity, and quality of life. Integrating the method also means training your spiritual memory. Whenever a worry or fear arises, you have the immediate reflex to apply the process, recognize, surrender, declare, and rest. This creates a cumulative effect. Each application strengthens the next, and each victory over anxiety increases your trust in God's faithfulness. Over time, anxiety loses nearly all its power because you've learned to respond differently with a spiritual practice that has become natural. The integration of the method into your life also allows you to better handle future challenges. Anxiety often stems from uncertainty and fear of the unknown. When you live consistently in this practice, the unknown ceases to be a source of paralysis. You begin to face new situations with confidence, knowing that even in the face of the unexpected, you can immediately resort to the method and find peace. This transforms how you plan, decide, and act, creating a more secure and balanced life. Furthermore, this integration generates testimony. The inner transformation resulting from consistent practice becomes evident to those around you. Friends, family, and colleagues notice the difference. Serenity in the face of chaos, clarity in decisions, unshakable trust. You become a living evidence that it's possible to overcome anxiety and live in peace, even in a world that constantly pressures and demands too much. Finally, living this way creates an inexhaustible cycle of spiritual strengthening. Each challenge, overcome with surrender and rest, deepens your faith. Each crisis surmounted with the method increases your trust in God. And each moment of peace conquered strengthens your identity and perception of destiny. This integration isn't just a tool for moments of need. It's a lifestyle that completely transforms your experience with anxiety, opening space to live fully, confidently, and at peace in all areas of life. In the next chapter, we'll conclude by showing how to consolidate this practice as part of your spiritual legacy, making God's peace a permanent reality in your heart, mind, and all your decisions. Arriving here means you've traveled the entire journey. You identified the root of anxiety, learned and applied the biblical method, experienced its effects in practice, transformed it into a lifestyle, and integrated it into every area of your life. But the final step is to consolidate this victory as a permanent part of your existence. Living in peace isn't just a moment, but a daily choice that becomes a habit, and over time, an identity. Each time you apply the method, each time you surrender your fears and rest in God's presence, peace becomes deeper, and trust becomes stronger. This consolidation doesn't depend on external circumstances, resolved problems, or immediate results. It depends on the conscious decision to walk consistently with God, even when situations remain challenging. The daily practice creates a cycle of spiritual strengthening that transforms fears into opportunities for faith, doubts into clarity, and anxiety into trust. Life, once dominated by the weight of worry, becomes marked by serenity, emotional stability, and alignment with divine purpose. When you realize every challenge can be faced with this method, you understand that anxiety has ceased to be an enemy and become a tool for learning and growth. Each moment of restlessness signals that it's time to apply the cycle of recognizing, surrendering, declaring, and resting, further strengthening your faith. Thus, the practice stops being just a resource and becomes a natural extension of who you are, shaping a life guided by biblical principles, trust, and wisdom. The impact of this permanent practice is also visible to those around you. People close to you notice the difference. Your serenity in crises, your clarity in important decisions, your ability to remain calm even in tough moments. This transformation generates positive influence, showing that it's possible to live in peace and trust, even in a world that constantly provokes fear and uncertainty. Your experience becomes a silent testimony of applied faith and real victory over anxiety. And here's the final key. True peace isn't the absence of problems, but the constant presence of God. When you live this method as an integral part of your life, every challenge becomes an opportunity to strengthen your faith, every worry a chance to draw closer to the Creator, and every moment of rest an experience of reconnection with your destiny. Victory over anxiety isn't a destination, but a lifestyle that transforms your mind, heart, and entire life. So keep this practice daily. Recognize, surrender, declare, and rest. Make it part of your spiritual routine, and you'll realize that peace becomes not just a temporary state, but the foundation of your entire existence. This is the promise God offers to all who choose to trust and surrender their lives to Him. And if you want to continue deepening your learning, receive more content that transforms mind, heart, and spirit, and discover other biblical principles. To live in victory and trust, subscribe to the channel now. Click the subscribe button, enable notifications, and join this journey of faith, clarity, and peace that's changing lives every day. Each video is one more step toward complete freedom from anxiety, and you can start today.